you are anything like me, you may be curious about the history of your family. You might ask questions like, how did your parents meet? Or who were your great-great-grandparents, and did they do anything of note? Maybe you're just wondering if your family could have come from royalty. I don't believe for 1 minute that you and I are alone in asking about our origins. In fact, many scientists and philosophers, in an attempt to answer the question of human origins, have tried their best to find a definitive link to humanity's distant past. They studied through book after book, proposed model after scientific model, and dug through tons and tons of rock and dirt in order to find out, to answer the question, where we come from. And after all of this work, many scientists have come to the misguided conclusion that we have evolved from the lowest single-cell life forms through millions of years into differing forms of animal-like creatures, all the way to where we are and who we are today. Even with the fossil record, they still have not found the missing link in that chain, though. The answer to the question of our origins, this missing link that science is so desperately searching for, has always been much easier to answer and to find than even science truly wants to admit. And it all comes down to one word: creation. In Genesis 1:1, we read, "In the beginning." Though these three words clearly lead us to the answer where the human race began, they've been the topic of hot debate in our world for far longer than most people believe. That is because the idea that we have been created means that there is a being without a beginning who is greater than us. We continue reading. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. We see the trouble now, don't we? This verse completely contradicts the conclusions of secular scientists or evolutionists, who have readily available in their arsenal a whole list of suppositions supported by so-called smoking guns of evolutionary theory. These proofs, which aren't proof at all. From fossils to the unreliable carbon dating, they believe they have this theory proven beyond doubt. To come to any other conclusion, in their minds, that includes the fact that an infinite, all-powerful, all-knowing God created everything that we see in both the heavens above and the earth here below, is seen in their eyes as childish and naive. But this verse clearly tells us that we were in fact created by an all-powerful and all-knowing God. A God whose compassion and love cannot possibly be explained or even understood by any person that has ever lived. Our origins did not come about out of a random series of events that occurred tens of billions of years ago, as science teaches, the start of which was not a simple word as the Bible tells us, but by a violent eruption of random elements that resulted in a Big Bang, which shot out the necessary components of life to the far reaches of the universe. Not only is this theory preposterous, but it is mathematically flawed. Now, what if I were to tell you that a simple mathematical equation could disprove the suppositions of evolutionary theory using only simple logic and irrefutable odds? Intrigued? Hope so. Now let's lay down a few basic points first, shall we? According to cosmological and evolutionary theory, we are told that the universe is about 14 billion years old, which of course begins with the origin of the Big Bang and comes down to today. Now, if we were, for our study, to calculate 14 billion years into seconds, that number would be 4.418 times 10 to the 17th power, or a 4 with 17 zeros behind it. This means that science believes our world to be this old in seconds. Now, please keep that number in mind, because it will become very important later on. But for now, allow me to introduce a friend of mine to you, Leonard Latour, though he prefers to be called Bones, for obvious reasons. Bones is here to help us with our study today. Now, most scientists would agree that bones, like our skeletal system, is relatively simple compared with the other systems in our bodies, such as the digestive system, the cardiovascular system, and is certainly true concerning the infinite complex nature of our nervous system. Now, because of Bones' skeleton's simplicity, this makes him a perfect reference point in our study. Now, on average, the adult human skeleton has 206 individual bones. Though this is a relatively small number when we consider a system of moving parts, I do believe we can make the study a bit more simple. So let's begin with only one bone, and then we can work our way up from there. Now, it doesn't matter which bone we use in our model, so let's use, say, the femur. Now, let's take the femur and let's place it next to us. Now, for our study, we aren't going to be concerned if the bone is right side up or even in the proper orientation at this point. The only requirement is that it should be roughly in its correct placement within the system. Now, take a guess. How many different ways can one bone be placed in relation to other bones? Well, in this case, we only have one, right? Well, within mathematics, there is a process called factorial. This works when you have a specific number that gets multiplied by the next number in line, and then you take the product of that multiplication process and multiply it by the next number in line, and so on and so forth, until you get to the very end of your equation. So in our case, we have 1 factorial. Now, any third grader should be able to tell you what 1 multiplied by itself is. Yep, just 1. Now, what if we had 2 components? Say we add in the tibia, for example. Then we'd be multiplying 2 by 1. Now, obviously, that's just the number of 2. So with one bone, we can only place it one way. If we had 2 in our system, then they can be arranged in 2 different ways. One here and one there, and vice versa. Now, what if we had 6 bones? Then we'd multiply 6 by 5, which is 30, and then by 4, which is 120, by 3, then 360, and 2, etc., all the way to the final product of 720, which means that a system of 6 bones could be put together 720 different ways. Thus, the odds of getting all the bones in the correct position the first time would be only 1 in 720. Now, those are pretty crazy odds. But now imagine with me the odds of getting all 206 bones in a normal adult skeleton to randomly fall into the correct position the first time. 206 factorial, right? Now, believe me, when we figure this out, it's a pretty big number. In fact, if you were to write it out, it would look something like this. It's a gigantic number, right? Perhaps it would mean more to you if you could read it in word form, perhaps. Well, okay. Now, it's a very long word number, so don't worry. I'll wait if you want to read it. Pause right now. I'm serious. Take your time. It's okay. I can wait. Done already? Okay, well, I don't blame you if you didn't have time to read it all. It is a really big number after all. But what exactly does this all mean? Remember that scientists believe that our universe is 14 billion years old, which we calculated out to 4 with 17 zeros behind it, which is this number right up here. Now, this is a far smaller number than the ginormous product of 206 factorial. This means that if we were to have all 206 bones randomly dropped in front of us or next to us, 1 try per second, we would only get the bones to fall in roughly the correct position in all of this ginormous number of tries. Now, when we compare the two numbers, the 14 billions of years worth of seconds and the number of potential positions of 206 bones, there is no way that we would ever be able to get the correct position of all the bones in the amount of time that science believes our universe to be old. You would run out of time before you actually got it right. And keep in mind that this mathematical process can't explain where the bones came from to begin with. So science doesn't have that answer. This means that the only answer to where the bones came from is the same answer to humanity's origins. And that answer is God. A being who, with the power of nothing but his voice, created all that we see, smell, hear, and perceive in the world around us. Infinite care and love, he formed the intricate patterns of life that we see. His wisdom formed a bird's wings, the gills of a fish, the eyes of an insect. But the crowning act of all creation, done with the most loving attention, the Lord God formed a man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. All of creation cries out and testifies about the power of its creator, except for humanity, who has tried to find other possibilities. Evolutionists, secular scientists, and others who subscribe to evolution have been so blinded by falsified evidence that they have clearly missed out on the only missing link that they themselves have omitted: God. Unless we have an all-knowing and an all-powerful God at the center of creation, then there will always be a missing link. And if we, as part of His creation, don't have Him in our lives, then there will always be a God-shaped hole in our hearts. If you look all around you, you can clearly see His work, the beauty of the magnificent design of creation. The same God who did all of this, I promise you, can do amazing things in your life if you would only allow Him.